everyone. Welcome to the Animals on Screen panel. We're the first ones in here this morning, so we're going to take advantage of those few extra minutes and get started. I'm just curious. Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Has anyone been to this particular discussion before? A few of us. Okay. Anyone in here that ever saw a movie with animals? Anyone that's ever been moved to tears by an animal movie? Okay, yeah, so there's a common thread in here. We are going to be discussing a lot of the fascination working with animals, film, TV, video game development. There's also some challenges. We're also going to talk about solutions. So don't worry if it starts to get sad. We're going to come back with some solutions. And we would like to do a Q&A probably in the last 10 minutes or so of the discussion. So about then, I'll prompt you if you have any thoughts or questions. You're welcome to line up at the mic. There'll also be a couple intense, some graphic video shown, so just want to give a heads up on that. If you saw the description from WonderCon, they said this is not exactly a warm and fuzzy feeling discussion, even though animals are. So let me just go ahead and get started. Introduce our panelists. First, we have Chris M. Allport, director, writer, composer. Credits include Pirates of the Caribbean, Godzilla, Emily or Oscar, and the Thunder Chronicles. Hi, Chris. Good morning. Yes, thank you. Might I add, we're going to go into this a little more, but Chris also personally has been involved with a lot of the legal legislation in changing laws around child actors and protecting them. So there's a connection here with animals. Ms. Bobbi Brink, sanctuary founder of Lions, Tigers, and Bears. We don't like the word advocate, but she is a voice to the animals, key player in the Big Cat Public Safety Act, and the founder of Lions, Tigers, and Bears Sanctuary. Welcome, Bobbi. And also Mark A.J. Nazal, Emmy Award-winning visual effects supervisor and executive. Credits include Gotham, Westworld, and Lucifer. Welcome back, Mark. So let me just go ahead and get started. Bobbi, Chris, kind of just to you. There's a general fascination with animals. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this room and they wouldn't be so popular on screen. Why is that?
Well, they communicate to us with their eyes. They don't really have to say very much because they can't speak in English, but everything they communicate is so human and so humane. Yet it's our responsibility to treat them humanely, and so many people don't. What's wrong with them?
Say what you will, I'm pretty sure my dog speaks to me.
Yeah.
To be fair.
Yeah, well, and you know, like I recently rescued this little 3.5-week-old kitten. You know, I mean, it had a voice, it was crying, and it had no mother and no food and no water. And, you know, I rescued him, and he immediately just became attached to our hearts because he's just so full of empathy. And so we're drawn to animals because they have something that we need to get back to them.
Now you're a cat dad.
Now I'm a cat dad.
So
I'm not a crazy cat lady, but I identify as one.
Big cat lady, Ms. Bobbi Brink, why do you think it is that animals that we love so much end up being in film, TV, video game, all these things as much as they are?
Well, exactly like Chris said, and then we're just mesmerized by animals. They make us feel good. They give us something we can't give ourselves. They make us feel good. We can give back to them. They have a way of communicating, like without talking. And then I think that's when the trouble comes in, when people learn they can make money from this.
Right, absolutely. And Mark, you're kind of on that. I know we're going to go into it in a deep dive on that, but what are you finding when people are hiring your services in VFX that they're trying to draw out of animation? What emotions?
Well, I mean, when you take a look at what kind of movies resonate, right, you do want to get a lot of that authenticity, the motion, the movement. But then really the films that kind of like resonate the most are when there is an emotional connection between the animals as actual characters. Obviously, you look at classics like Free Willy, and then there is a lot of controversy behind those. Whereas today, there definitely is technology available that can make sure that you alleviate that suffering, that the unnecessary suffering.
Right. But we do, either way, what I think from all the panelists, there's such a strong connection to animals. So it makes sense then in our entertainment, we would want to have them included as well.
Public interest in animals, or public interest in anything, translates directly to profit. So if there's a great general public interest in animals and the entertainment business can quantify that and find a way to draw emotion on screen, which is what we as storytellers and filmmakers do, we draw emotion from people, then they will use animals to draw that emotion, which equals profit, ticket sales, royalties, residuals, and box office proceeds.
The real movers behind behind show business. So let's go into that discussion for a little bit. Anyone here see Life of Pi? Okay, right, very good. So as Mark is going to bring out, it won an Academy Award for its work. Anytime someone wins an Oscar, they see their profits increase by as much as 80%. So there's and yet we all think of that as a movie about a tiger, not necessarily about a boy. Right? So that was the real star of the film. So this culture then that developed, it's mostly unregulated, right, Bobbi? Chris, we've worked with child groups, so it's similar. It's widely documented that this creates kind of a culture of abuse and neglect because it's a group that cannot speak for themselves. The proper care of these animals gets to be very expensive. Chris, as a director, when you're working with humans, what are some of those challenges when you can communicate the language?
Well, when you're talking about directing children or directing animals, what you have is a set of people that are essentially employed on screen that require special regulations and special care because, as Michelle said, they don't have a voice to speak for themselves. I mean, children do, but they can't vote. That means they can't sign a contract. So you have a culture of abuse, and that's what we're here to talk about, sort of shine a light on and help the public understand to make ethical choices when consuming media, that you can choose to watch a film that was ethically created, where the animals and the children were protected. Oddly enough, animals have more protection than children in the entertainment business, but it's still not enough, right? So,
and how regulated?
Yeah, it's still not regulated enough. And as we know, Bobbi has a sanctuary for these. You see that beautiful cat? That's her cat on the screen. And he was retired from doing commercials. I mean, what animal was made to sit there under the hot lights and, behave in a certain way its entire life? Like, is that really fair? I think that's one of the questions that we have to ask.
Bobbi, let's talk about Louie and some of these animals. So how does that normally work then? If someone is a filmmaker and they say, I really would love to have a tiger or a bear in my movie, how generally is that done? Not saying that's how it should be done, but how does it work for those of us that don't know?
Right. Well, I think a lot of the producers, the people making the movies, the public, all of us don't know what happens to the animals after. So a lot of these animals are speed bred. They're bred for nothing more than profit or to be used to be trained for the movies or have your photo taken. And then most of them are killed. They disappear. The lucky ones will end up at a sanctuary like mine. So sometimes they won't work for very long. So a big cat will live 20 years, a bear at least 30 years. They might work for the trainer for 5 to 7 years. So then they have to continually replace those animals. And things like you're going to see today can go wrong. And I think just people don't really know what happens to the animals after the movie.
Let's take a look at that one. This is the tiger from The Life of Pi. I believe that's our first clip. And Bobbi,
let's talk about this before, because what you're going to see is when you see the movie The Life of Pi and you see the tiger up on the boat and he's facing forward, you're going to see how they train him to sit on that boat. And that's what makes him sit right where he's sitting.
Let's take a look.
You loose lead? Okay, well, so he's prepared to go to more trouble to not do it, and that's why I got on him as hard as I did. Okay, you want to on the ring curb? Okay, so I want to drive his head towards you.
Yes.
So that's what we do.
All right, enough.
Because I like hitting him in the face, and the paws were to get the paws off the. And with the beauty of the paws being on the rock, when you hit him, it's like a vice.
Yeah.
Right? So it doesn't do that, it does that. It stings more. Sit.
Sit. Sit.
But here's the problem at the end of the day. If we had been running a videotape the whole time we were here, and we did a 45-second montage of the times I struck this animal, PETA would burn this place to the ground.
Bobby? So
This is exactly what's happening and how it happens. Because this is how they train these animals.
So he said this tiger would rather be whipped than perform. Chris, how would a director respond? Can it happen to a human actor?
Well, yeah, I've seen it happen. I mean, maybe not direct physical beatings from a director, but how does it happen? I mean, an ethical director would say, "We're not doing this." A producer would say, "We're not doing this. Shut the production down." You have to know when to say stop. Like when it's not worth getting the shot. Safety of animals, safety of people has to come first. Safety has to come first, and you can't treat. And I mean, an animal is a sentient being. These are beautiful, and I mean, to watch that, it's greatly disturbing. And yes, if PETA took a 45-second clip from that guy, he would look like a monster because he is a monster.
So to Bobby's point, an animal actor for that money shot, is it worth the life that the animal experiences to be able to create this beautiful product? And that's what us as consumers need to ask ourselves. And then also, what are the alternatives that the entertainment industry is providing? Bobby, we had another clip of an animal that actually lives at your sanctuary, correct? That was used not necessarily for the film, although he was used in film, right? What was his backstory, real quick, the clip that we're about to watch?
So Rocky was raised for nothing more than to be used for the movies, and he was used in multiple movies. And luckily, this trainer actually cared about the bear, because most of them would just let the animal be put down. And he actually wanted him to come to my place, and we made it happen. It doesn't always happen for all the entertainment animals. Most of them just disappear.
Because of this incident, right?
Because of the incident.
Take a look.
He did the one thing Randy feared most.
Good. That's great. Okay!
Where is he?
Is he bleeding? Yes, he is. He's bleeding. Okay.
Is he doing okay?
No.
Okay.
He's really still.
Okay.
He's not breathing anymore.
He's not breathing anymore?
No.
I want you to take a deep breath and cover his mouth with your mouth, making a tight seal.
I was applying CPR. At this point, I had pepper spray from Stevie's mouth and face all over mine, and I couldn't see.
Come on, Stevie. Hold on.
I want you to count out loud.
4, 5, 6,
6, 7, 8.
And I just remember this feeling like he had just left it.
Rocky lives at your sanctuary.
Right, he's 19 years old, and he'll probably spend the rest of his life with us. He'll live at least 30 years.
Yeah, so this is a movie bear, trained to attack people to get a great shot, right?
Think
Chris,
about that, a 700-pound grizzly bear taught to bite you on the neck.
Chris, you had mentioned before about Alfred Hitchcock and some of the ways in making film that he didn't have to actually hurt people. Can you speak to that?
Well, one of the things that you find of the greatest filmmakers, like Kubrick and Hitchcock's, specifically, is that the attack is, you don't see it, and it's the psychological suspense, the psychological injury of not seeing it that actually makes a better film. When you see the impending doom, and then you cut to black. Like, that's a really cool psychological trick that's been used for 100 years in filmmaking to not have to, do the real thing on camera, but what your mind fills in. is actually scarier than watching.
Right. So as film and cinema has developed, audiences, we kind of want more graphic and intense scenes has led to incidents like this. So these are wild animals. They are being used as props and as actors, but without a voice. And then, like to Bobbi's point, what is their life? Maybe they're not harmed during the making of this film, but what is their life before and after? What was the training? What did that entail to get them to perform?
Let me counter. You said audiences want more and more graphic, exploitation on screen. My question is do they really want it, or is that what they're being fed? So what audiences want are great stories, but they're going to consume whatever's put in front of them because they have no control over creating that story. So the only control that you do have is by choosing to watch only projects that are ethical.
Well, I kind of want to speak to that because how many people here know that Life of Pi won the Oscar for visual effects for the tiger on Life of Pi? So it really becomes the question, was it really necessary for those money shots when a lot of those money shots were practically removed and replaced with a digital tiger? So what were the motivations that made them feel like they needed to do that as a requirement? I mean, when you take a look at a lot of the memes online for Life of Pi, you often see the actor with a blue screen doll where the tiger's head is supposed to be, and then obviously the visual effects part where the tiger is now there. So the question is, especially at this point in time, is it really still even a requirement to have? And the answer is no.
And even in 1991, I did Hocus Pocus, that Bette Midler movie with the black cat. And I did some voice work for the black cat. That was an animatronic cat, and it was like a robot, but it was so good that everybody believed it. Like, there was no actual animal used for that.
Mark Green breaks up a great point. How many people, I know I have been impressed when they say this was shot with real animals? Just me? Okay, no, yeah, you guys, a couple honest people in here. I was impressed before this panel, before this discussion. I wanted to see the real animals because, as we said, we're fascinated, we're mesmerized by them. Mark, can you lean into that a little bit more? And I'm going to make this connection here with Rocky the bear, Cocaine Bear, what you do. Here you take like a bear. Why is it that someone would use a real bear when there is a more ethical option?
I think for now, there's always been a controversy of CG looking, quote unquote, looking like CG. I think there is this stigma that when people think they can, see what's behind the curtain, they feel clever. So that kind of affects the perception of when, for instance, there was this marketing campaign as an example on Barbie where they claim that they used no visual effects. I mean, really, when you take a look at that film, I mean, how could you not even have any visual effects in that film? It's completely just fantastical. I think there is somewhat of a hidden audience value created by a marketing team that values when things are done for real, even when they're unreal. But at the same time, you question, even there's even a waste component to that. As an example, if you watched Wicked, was it really required for them to have, say, thousands and thousands of flowers just for one set and one shot when that could be done digitally with so much less carbon footprint? But somehow it's a great marketing tactic.
Why is it, Mark, that producers, higher up studios would even think we need this? Where are they taking that information to deduce this is how we have to do it?
Well, I think it's a bit of a disconnect. When you think of Hollywood, you think of one thing, when really it's a lot of small ecosystem of different industries, different people, and different branches of the industry. So your producer may not be the people dealing with marketing in so many ways. So that there's probably a disconnect, but perhaps a better ethical training for the entire industry really would be required from top to bottom, because it's not one group, it's multiple sets and segments of different people doing different things.
So what we're pulling really as consumers, as fans, is that our thoughts matter. How we feel about projects and how they're made is going to affect all the way up to producers and studios, how they make these products. So Mark, we have some videos that show a little bit about what you do and how to make this realistic. Maybe we can show that. You can walk us through it.
Yeah, of course. So before I say anything, the big caveat to doing anything good or anything realistic in visual effects is that it's not a one-person deal. It's not a click AI, make me a tiger that looks realistic. It takes a team of people that know anatomy, that know animation, that know motion, that know fur. It takes a team to create it. So here we'll show you a little bit about one of our teams that actually builds the work and creates the work to do these fantastical elements and what they've done so far.
Hi, I'm Balázs Jankovic and I am the visual effects supervisor here at iNet Studios.
And my name is Csaba Bárdos and I'm the animation director.
From crawling spiders to wolves in forests,
and even flying dragons in the sky.
It takes a lot of planning and technical know how to make sure things look good on screen.
And move well too. From a story perspective, the most important things are the personality, background and motivation of the character.
These three determine each behavior, reaction, emotion and movement of the CG animal in every situation, in every shot.
What Renko is trying to say is that before we can even get to creating good CG, we need to know the story first.
Today we now have the tools to create whatever we want in CG, given the right time, budget and context.
After the detailed discussion with the production, the director, producer and client-side VFX supervisor, we begin with determining what the character is all about, what its movements are, the expressions needed, and how it's composed in various shots.
This is followed by collecting concepts and references for the look and the movement of the animal, the more the better here. Then we share it with our team of CG specialists for different tasks from modeling, texturing, look development, and for certain creatures grooming to create the natural, realistic or stylized assets of the animal on the screen. In our case with the spider in the film Black Spider, it had to look and feel natural, but with a sense of character that was not necessarily disgusting.
As you may have guessed, the next thing I will talk about that is important and something that my department manages is the animation or movement of the character. After we create the rig or bones of the animal with controls for animation, we look at other things, whether or not we have to add additional elements that define the look of the movement, like underlying muscle simulations. The key to this is to actually closely study the movement of the reference animal to make sure it moves like it would in real life. We use as much video reference as possible and even film references in real life to ensure the highest level of quality.
Lastly, we work closely with the on-set visual effects supervisor to make sure that we capture on-set data from the set lighting to the camera lenses, use the other information that makes sure we are able to photographically replicate how the CG elements would look in the scene for realism.
Yeah, overall, our job is to make the illusion of real life, and if we do our job well, the audience won't even notice what we did, unless it's intentional, stylized, or very fantastical.
As you can see, it takes a proper planning with various creatives and a great team to make sure that we are able to create the best work possible.
We hope you enjoyed our presentation on animals on screen. And now, back to the panel.
Fascinating work.
So to kind of just recap on what everybody's saying, it really is a group of specialists that do different things. What digital work really is just pretty much what people have done for years with more traditional techniques like puppetry, but now it's in a digital space and you have more latitude to create a better sense of realism and a better sense of drama with multiple.
So are there any aspiring filmmakers in this room, or actual filmmakers, storytellers? Okay, because those stories, that they start with you and then they end up on screen. So as we're becoming more and more aware of this process, I want to start with you, Mark, and then go to you, Bobbi. In the video, he mentioned time and budget. So what are some of the misconceptions of time? Let's say a storyteller says, I have a great vision. I'd love to bring my story to life. Time specifically.
So I think time, especially now that the technology's gotten better, obviously, time is probably not the same as time during Life of Pi. It's probably a quarter of that. But still, the time factor does have to be considered and respected. Therefore, those decisions need to happen early on to make sure that the filmmakers consciously make a choice that they're going to take this digitally and make sure that they're accounting for the time and the budget to make it happen.
So if someone came to you and said, I need this many assets of a spider, instead of hiring a trained spider, I need to give you enough time to develop that. You can't.
Oh, absolutely. And also on top of that, as humanity has started using these digital assets over time, there are now existing assets. Like if you go to a CG marketplace, you'll see tigers of different shades, colors, sizes, you name it, you can find them. So it really isn't necessary, especially in those quote unquote money shots. You can still get those money shots without having to resort to, let's just say the legacy methods.
So, Bobbi, a lot of times someone will end up using a movie bear or a movie tiger because they think it's a lot more affordable than what Mark Nazal's company can provide.
Definitely not, because they're a much less controllable variable. Whereas here, you're able to control every single nuance, every strand of hair, well, you name it.
Every strand of hair, that sounds nice. Okay, Bobbi, can you tell us a little bit about the cost just of the animals that you've encountered from the entertainment world?
Right, so just to build a habitat is anywhere from $300,000 to $1.5 million, depending on what you're building, to make sure they have rocks, dirt, grass, trees, dens, pools to swim in, flowing waters like waterfalls, things like that. About 10 to 20,000 minimum per year to feed, and then of course they're keepers, so I'm sure you can imagine what salaries cost, and then vet care. So it's not cheap, and like I said, these animals live 20 to 30 years, and there's not one sanctuary in this country that can take all the animals.
Just if you don't know, if you've never been there, just about 30 miles east of San Diego, Bobbi's Sanctuary, Lions, Tigers, and Bears, is amazing. It's Southern California's only true exotic animal sanctuary. Can you tell us a little bit about that real quick? No breed, no kill.
Right, a true sanctuary will never breed, sell, trade, or buy animals. So the animals come for life. We do work with each other once in a while. Like myself, I'm one of the only people in the country who have a proper transport to transport the animals. So I'll actually go in with the first responders, help to get these animals out of places they shouldn't be, and get them to a true sanctuary, whether it's my sanctuary or a different sanctuary across the country.
Can I just
but once they get to the sanctuary, they're there for life.
Bobbi's so cool. Literally 30 minutes ago, she was like, I was talking to the head of wildlife fishing team. I'm like, this lady rolls like that. So you definitely want to visit her sanctuary. Chris, you let out a big sigh as a producer-director when you heard $1 million just to build a habitat. Had that money gone to into VFX, what could that do for production? Mark and Chris, go ahead. I see.
I can tell you right now, it won't cost that much.
I think 1.5 million could buy a lot of filmmaking. and I just want to say, film as a director and a filmmaker and a storyteller, my job is to make you believe something that didn't actually happen. The movie is the magic. What the audience is watching is the magic trick. And the cool thing is when, we shoot on a green screen and we pull off Central Park, or we shoot a scene with an animal, and Mark created this thing that is so believable that it doesn't take you out of the scene. And that's one of the big things that you have to do when you're editing and when you're directing, is just make sure that you're not taken out of the scene. And so you you simplify, and you focus on only what matters. That's the magic trick. And when you do that, you don't actually have to have the real thing, because in storytelling, it needs to be a bit exaggerated anyway. That's where the magic is. So if we can use these tools, VFX, and the wonderful artists, and employ them, and they're being employed humanely and being paid a fair wage, we don't have to abuse animals. And I think that for us to all become aware, like, yes, we've been entertained by animals, for 100 years or more on screen. But what was the cost to the animal? What was the cost to that animal's life? We don't think about that. Like Bobbi says, what happens before? What happens after?
Can I comment on that? American Humane is the only organization that is able to give the accreditation no animals were harmed during the making of this film. We've done this panel several times. We've reached out for comment every single time. I just want to say as a moderator, it's disappointing to me the industry's lack of response in things as simple as an inquiry, and it does make me fear for how that works behind the scenes. So I will throw that out. We'd love to be corrected on that, but as of yet have not been. So Bobbi, to make up costs for this, you're mentioning $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million to keep these animals and give them a life. How does that, and how do owners and trainers often end up making up costs?
Well, to do it right, that's what it costs for the animal to live a proper life. The state law, like California state law, is only 350 square feet for a tiger, 450 square feet for a bear. So that's usually what they're housed on. So Rocky, the bear in this movie, was housed in a 450 square foot cage his entire life on concrete for 19 years. So that brings on the early arthritis, and he's not as limber as he should be. He can't stand all the way up and jump up like a grizzly bear should be. It takes a toll on them. But for the most part, most of the trainers, that's how they're kept. A lot of them are kept in trailers. They transport around in trailers. They spend a lot of time. Mark and I have followed many, many trailers to see where the trailers end up. And yeah.
And then if they want cubs, that creates a new problem. We're talking
right,
about
so we call that speed breeding, and a lot of people don't know tigers can breed just like a dog, even faster. The females, when they give birth, they'll pull the babies about 8 days old, right when their eyes open. They'll pull the babies. This brings the female back into heat. They can breed them back every 105 days. That's their gestation, and they'll keep breeding. Bears are a little different every other year, but bears don't always breed every time in the wild, where they're forced to breed more in captivity. And we've got some animals at our place, Crystal being one of them, white tiger. They'll keep them in 10x10s, both of them in a 10x10, so they continuously breed, and they'll spend their whole life in a 10x10.
So as a consumer, let's say as a filmmaker, I say, okay, so I've been impacted by this panel. I want to go with Mark Nazal's company. I want to go a different route. Mark, how much budget, we're saying, compared to this 1.5, if someone wanted to make a simple story, can they come to you and say, this is the budget I have to work with? How does VFX model work?
Well, so the VFX model kind of like works in a bit, and I will correct myself. Like, it can cost 1.5, but it might not be 1.5 over a lifetime, right? So when you look at something like The Lion King, I mean, the budgets for those are around the $200 million, like in theory. But at the same time, you kind of like think of the long term of it as well. And plus, as the technology gets better, the price does go down. It's not as straightforward as like, how much would it cost? Because every scene is unique. Every shot is unique. It'll have to be tailored to the shot, to the lighting, to the story. So to Chris's point, the filmmaker has to make early onset choices to determine what it is they need and where and when, and do they have the budget for it? It's the same concept as, am I gonna do a Ferrari falling off a building if I don't have a Ferrari, right? You're really going to choose your moments to make your moments worthwhile.
I think that, as a storyteller, you need to learn to become economical. And that doesn't just mean economical with money. It might translate to that, but visually economical, storytelling economical, where you're not wasting a single frame of film. And what that means is, what do I need to convey this to the story, to the audience? And you find that you actually don't need all of the stuff that you originally thought of. You might spew all that stuff out in a brainstorming session, and then you start editing and cutting and refining your script till you define those exact moments. Let's say there is a bear shot, which I have in one of my scripts. I'm well aware of it, and I know what's going to go on. That shot that we have, the bear is in the dark in the back of the cave 90% of the scene, and it only comes out in the very last bit. And I already know we're going to send that shot over to Mark to have him do it, because there's absolutely no need for us to recreate a bear attack in person. There's no need for that. I mean, it's like using a real weapon on set. We all saw what happened with Rust. Why? It's completely unnecessary.
So let's take that thread, because as consumers now, we're becoming more and more aware and selective about the producers, directors, the studios that we're going to give our profits to. Mark, who do you think should come to the table? Generally, there's a studio or producers, they hire a director, they hire a videographer, and they just kind of give assignments. But how do you feel this should be done?
I think if anything, right, it always comes down to, well, film and TV structures tend to be a little bit different, but it's going to be down to the producers, really. I mean, the director has some pull if it's a film, TV, not so much. But everybody who's on top, everybody who has the ability to make decisions should be able to make those decisions.
So even at the very beginning, bring in VFX, bring in Bobbi Brink. Can I just say, I said this last time, it should now say, all animals were treated humanely per Bobbi Brink in this film. That's what I'm putting out into the universe. Chris, who do you think should come to the table for these productions?
The thing is, I often get called in at the last minute to fix something that already happened that didn't go right. And if you bring people to the table to begin with, if you're dealing with animals and you bring in Bobbi and you bring in Mark at the beginning and you get their input, you're going to have a better output on the other end, rather than saying, oh, shoot, we have to fix this problem really quick and we weren't prepared. So if you get prepared ahead, first of all, it's going to be easier. Second of all, you're going to have the support of your colleagues and your collaborators, and that's going to help make your movie better, and it's going to make your team better, because you want your team to be working together where everybody's bringing their individual expertise to the team. And then you go with that if you're a producer, as opposed to trying to be reactionary at the last minute when something doesn't go right. So I say bring them in at the beginning and get the reports of the data. They already know what the data is. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Mark knows what he's doing. Bobbi knows what she's doing. You know what you're doing. And when you bring in the people who know what they're doing, it's just so much easier and so much more fun.
I concur with that.
Bobbi, would you welcome a seat at the table of producers working with animals?
Of course.
Yeah, and I think we've had discussions before that there's also a difference between animals that choose our company, right? A dog, a cat, versus an animal that has to be captured or bred in order to make it perform. What sort of questions should producers and directors be asking of you if they wanted to embark on a film or a video game or something involving animals?
I would say number one is what can go wrong? Because with exotic animals, a lot can go wrong, and these animals can kill you in a hot second. They're dangerous, they're wild, they belong in the wild, and training them takes time. It takes a lot of time, and they don't always perform.
Right. So we're going to open up some questions to the audience. So if you have any thoughts, just come on up to the mic these last few minutes. And let me just also speak with our panelists about consumers voting by choices, right? Downloads, streams, ticket sales, merchandise. We are voting with our dollars. So an average film buff might think, I don't have any power here, when in reality, Chris, Mark, how much power does the consumer have?
I would say a lot.
Consumer, our entire market is driven by public perception, and for better or for worse, that's what it's driven by. So if you do your research about how something, the same way if you buy organic food, and like you do your research about how is this farmed, then you start realizing that sustainable farming is better for your body and than a lot of commercial stuff. So it's the same with media. Be careful about what you're consuming. Ask what you're consuming before you consume it.
Go ahead, question, please.
Yeah, I was just wondering from the videos that we watched earlier, if anything, like if these people were banned or punished somehow for treating the animals this way.
Bobbi?
Absolutely no punishment, nothing. He's had other animals, which he kept, and he did keep Rocky for a little while. Then he put Rocky in a boarding facility, which was even smaller than 350 square feet, and then he came to my place.
Thank you.
Great question. Thank you. Hi, welcome.
I have two separate questions. If someone wants to go after me, I can just do one. First, you mentioned at the beginning you don't like using the word animal advocate. I kind of wanted to ask why and what's like preferred.
That's just my choice. Yeah.
And I also wanted to ask, so Mark, you said like there isn't like an easy answer for like cost for scenes, and so I wanted like.
No, it's a complex question only because it comes down to what a studio's rate is, what the rate of the work is, where is it getting done, are you utilizing rebates? It's a more nuanced question, but that can certainly be offline.
So I wanted to ask, so say like if you had two different 5-second shots and one is like a wolf very far in the background and one's a wolf right center front, like how would the difference kind of?
I would say dramatically. The closer it is, the more detail you'd have to put into it and the more realistic it has to be. The further it is, the lesser that has to be. Like I would say it's an almost 10-time difference.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Very good panel, very informative. I had a question. So when they're directors going to use, is it director's choice to use a live animal or is it CGI? It just depends on the shot. I mean, who makes that decision?
It's a great, excellent question.
Budget reasons?
I mean, I think that when you have, certainly going back to the old days before there was CGI, they would just have animal trainers and they were part of the conversation and part of the studio machine, going back to when studios controlled everything, which they're kind of doing now again, but they would have animal trainers on staff. But, so a lot of that is just legacy, as Mark called it, left over from the past and not evolving as quickly as the technology is evolving. So, it could be a producer or a director that says, oh yes, I have to have this live animal. I have to have it. And everybody just starts jumping and saying, yes, okay, let me get that for you, sir. And instead of questioning and saying, well, hey, we may have a better way of doing this that may cost less money and be less harmful. So the more that we ask the questions and get into the rooms where the decisions are being made, the more that we can influence moving toward a less abusive model. I've got no problem with using a child or an animal that's not being abused, but as it turns out, especially with animals, most of them are being abused, and there's a lot of child abuse going on too.
So look, I think I might be able to speak to that also a little succinctly because I'm coming. Hold on, no, I'm still good because I'm coming from a publicity background, and Mark, you might have a thought as well. So studios and producers generally own the IP. They generally own the product, and they're trying to figure out how can we afford to get it made, and how much time do we have to get it made. So the first thought is, let's hire an animal trainer. But now, from that top down, they're going to also be pulling and doing research from their general audience. So we, as consumers, when we go, I am more in favor of VFX, even if it's not perfect, in my opinion, than the option of this animal who has to live its life in captivity. I'm more okay with that. The producers will pull that data from our social media posts, from word of mouth, from gossip on the street, and it trickles back up. And I think that helps to make a more informed decision, a more ethical decision. Does that sound about right?
Oh, yeah, I mean, public opinion sways a lot. So when there's public backlash about a certain effect not being up to par, then it kind of like creates some sort of negative perception on the work when really you don't know what factors led to that, whether they were asked last minute, they didn't have enough money, or, there could be like a ton of factors.
Thank you so much for that. Great question. One more, please. Welcome.
Yeah, kind of two questions kind of related to each other. So at the end of the day, do you feel that there should be more regulations about what animals should be used at all for filmmaking or any sort of entertainment? Because, I mean, for example, a tiger, they're not domesticated. They're like house cats and dogs. It's proven that they're evolved to live alongside us, but a tiger, just too much can go wrong. So would you say there are certain animals that just absolutely should not be used for human?
For myself, I personally think no exotic animals should be used for movies. I watch what they go through and how the training works and, how they are before and after. And as far as domestics, I think it needs to go just like children, where it's, there are dogs that do like to perform and do like to do things, but there needs to be boundaries and lines.
And then kind of related to that, so in terms of like what I'm going for in just animation, not necessarily VFX, but the concept art and all that, sometimes they do bring in animals for us to look at to come up with a character design or observe the mannerisms. But if we're somehow able to tell that an animal is being abused, who should we go to? People who are in the business, not necessarily.
You can call me.
Yeah, I figured.
This is the lady. All answers are Bobbi Brink at Lance Tigers and Bears.
Definitely.
Thank you. Well, we're going to wrap just on that comment. Who would we give our power to, our dollars, our support to? We have one last trailer we'll show about Bobbi's Sanctuary, and then let you all know about a special event on May 17th. You can go ahead and play that.
Would you believe me now if I told you I got caught up in a wave? Almost gave it away. Would you hear me out if I told you I was terrified for days? Thought I was gonna break. Oh, I couldn't stop it, tried to slow it all down. Crying in the bathroom, had to figure it out. With everyone around me saying, you must be so happy now. Oh, if you keep reaching out, then I'll keep coming back. If you're gone for good, then I'm okay with that. If you leave the light on, then I'll leave the light on. I am finding out there's a snow of the way, and I'm still dancing at the end of the day. If you leave the light on, then I'll leave the light on. Until you believe me.
Thank you, Bobbi. Can I just say, what's also amazing about this nature, I'll just throw it out as food for thought as we part, are animals bred in the name of conservation that never get released to the wild, really conserving, really helping. So the work that Lions, Tigers, and Bears does, that's an excellent place to visit and give your donation dollars. We're talking about giving power. So I want to thank all of my panelists for your awareness. They'll be around. Feel free to talk to them, probe them, ask them more questions. And there is an event May 17th at Lions, Tigers, and Bears. Alan here has some flyers. Raise your hand, Alan. You can come get them from him. Really neat. You can walk all among these animals, some of these ones that we've already seen that are now living out a truly happily ever after. Thank you guys. Enjoy the rest of WonderCon.